So our next presenter is Ioana. So she's Susi Lestari Ioana. She's a PhD candidate at the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development at the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands. She started her PhD in 2017, and her ongoing research is focused on platform economy, mobility transitions in societal settings. So I know that her work has been on Indonesia, and she will tell you more about her work and particularly on the informal mobility. So welcome, and floor is yours.
Okay. Could you please share my screen, because I think I have my laptop.
Yeah, just give me a second. I have it here. Okay. PowerPoint. Okay, and then I will full screen. Is that good?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Vivasi and Raphael, for organizing these sessions of webinar. It's a very interesting topic indeed about how the social practice has been changed during the COVID-19 crisis. And here today, I would like to present one of my PhD paper that is currently in progress and was also literally disrupted by the pandemic, because originally I planned to conduct ethnographic research on exploring the mechanism of this informal mobility in Jakarta, but then it is impossible to do during this pandemic times. So I rely much more on my online data to do my research. And I'm looking forward to have insightful and discussions and comments from all of you today. So I hope everyone is doing well and healthy. And today I'll present about informal mobility in Jakarta or in Indonesia in general during the time of a COVID-19 crisis. As a bit of background, we can go to the next slide. I'll try to collect data of the COVID-19 cases in Indonesia, and I tried to compare with other countries in Southeast Asia region. As we can see, the data was collected 2 days ago at the latest, 7th September. And 2 days ago, Indonesia was still the highest country in terms of daily new confirmed cases of COVID-19. And then followed by the Philippines, as we can see. And then this number was already more than 3,000 cases, which is a lot bigger if we compare with other countries like Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. And in terms of a timeline, Indonesia did have not a lockdown, but like a semi-lockdown. We call it large scale of social restrictions. It was start from March until July. And if you can see from the data, from March until July, the number was increasing. And then after that, the Indonesian government decided to start the new normal. And then if we could see, if we compare the numbers during this semi-lockdown or large scale of social restriction and the new normal, it keeps increasing. And it looks like in Indonesia, we haven't done with the first wave of COVID-19 yet. So it's pretty kind of a serious conditions right now in Indonesia. So in this kind of a context, I'd like to bring this COVID-19 situation to the relation. How does this affect the informal mobility in Indonesia? So we're going on into the next slide. I'm happy that Professor David before has been presenting about this multi-level perspective that I also use in my paper. So I'm using the old versions or like the standard versions of the MLP perspective. But what I about this multi-level perspective is how this MLP views transition as a non-linear process that result from the interplay of development at three analytical levels: from the bottom, the MIS, which is focused on innovations, and then second level is the socio-technical regime, which the locus of established practices and associated rules that stabilize existing system. And at the top level as an exogenous socio-technical landscape. So in this presentation, I'd like to focus on the top level, the socio-technical is the wider context. And I'd like to use the publication by Vandril and Scott, because earlier publication characterized the socio-technical landscape as stable or very slow moving, like soil conditions or lakes or mountains. But Vandril and Scott in 2005 developed a more differentiated view with three types of landscape dynamics. The first one is factors that do not change or that change very slowly, like the climate. And then the second is rapid external shock, such as wars or oil price fluctuations. In this case, I also categorize the COVID-19 as a rapid shock. And the third one is a long-term change in a certain directions or trend-like patterns, such as demographic change, which is also in this paper. I'm going to use one of the landscape from this long-term trend, which is a digitalization as a long-term change or trend in mobility. Go to the next slide. Here, I mentioned the two landscapes that actually, in my view, are influencing or shaping the mobilities in general, and also Indonesia in particular. So the first one is the COVID-19 crisis. How does this impact mobility? Well, as we all know that in COVID-19 crisis has a very strict protocol on physical distancing, and everyone is trying to figuring out what does this physical distancing mean. In general, we know that it means 1.5 meters, but then I will explain later how does it also been shaped by the particular situation in informal mobility. And then the other influence on mobility because of this COVID-19 crisis is the stay at home or working at home's encouragement from the government, and some government even have to forbid people to work at the office. And then also a lockdown, so then it reduced dramatically the mobility of the people in the urban and the rural area. And the other context on the social practices that we can see is the limitation of public transport. In most countries, they are reducing the capacity. Sorry, that was the train back noise. So in several countries, they reduced the capacity of public transport in order to maintain the physical distancing. And then the last one, the trend, the rising trend in using private-based transport, such as car and also bike. In Jakarta, there is now a growing number of people using bike because they feel that bike is much more private. They don't have to share with others. They don't have to take public transport as well. And also it's good for a physical exercise and maintaining their health. And the other landscape, which is a long-term trend that I think are very much shaping the mobility, is the digitalization. Or if I use the term from Jose van Dijk from her book, Platform Society, she explained this process of platformization when there is a business which was earlier existed in the offline world. Now they have a transition process or moving into the online world, like taxi, like Uber, for example, or accommodation business like Airbnb, and e-commerce business, and so on. So in this research, I try to use these two landscape change to see how does this affect the mobility. And going to the next slide, please. I'm using the case of informal mobility in Indonesia. As you can see in the picture, there is three big players, digital app-based mobility, which is Uber was the global company, and then Grab was originally from Malaysia, now based in Singapore, and they operated in the Southeast Asia region mostly. And then Gojek is a homegrown company from Indonesia that is now trying to expand their business also in the Southeast Asia region. But as we know, Uber has left Southeast Asia for 2018. So pretty much now the Indonesian mobility market are a duopoly between this Grab and Gojek in terms of digital app-based business models. So that's a bit of a background, and then we go next. So in order to define what does actually we mean by informal mobilities, I'm using definition by Webb and all that trying to define informal economy exists because of the incongruence between what is defined as legitimate by formal and informal institutions. So on the right pictures, there is pictures of the conventional motorbike taxi or the informal motorbike taxi. You see there is some sitting over there, usually on the street of the on the corner on the street, and then you're just trying to sit and wait for the customer. And if you want to get their services, you just need to wave your hand and then asking, negotiate for the price and where you want to go, and then voila, you already get the services. So if we look at the diagram from Webb, how does this can be categorized as informal economy? If you see on the left side, the means, or in this sense, the motorbike, are actually legal. I mean, everyone are allowed to have a motorbike. And also in terms of informal institution, they are legitimate. It is legitimate to use a motorbike on the road. But then on the means, on the surfaces, as a passenger services, in Indonesia, it's still illegal to use motorbike as passenger transport. But in terms of legitimacy, it is legitimate because it is accepted by social practices. So in that sense, we can categorize this motorbike taxi, or in Indonesia we call it ojek, as an mobility. So we're going to next. I'd like to show in the next slide, I'd like to show the transitions of this informal mobility from time to time. If you click 1 to 5, yes, we see how this began usually it's began in the 80s until 20s, that this ojek, or the motorbike taxi, was perceived as a transport for transition, which means that, well, the characteristic of the road in Indonesia, especially in the city area, are very much have insufficient public transport and sometimes unreliable in terms of time. So commuters are relying more on the private transport or the cars. So it creates massive gridlock problems. So in that kind of, the motorbike taxi become solutions or a gap filler for commuters to get into point A to point B. But then people perceive it will be only a temporary situation, because once the public transport is sufficient, then commuters will choose public transport and leave motorbike taxi. But the question, does it really like that? So in next timeline, we have this platformization timeline where the innovation of came into the mobility services like Uber, Grab, and Gojek. So what happened is, before they perceived this informal mobility as transport for transition, but now their function is increasing and becoming much more feasible. And I think in the last year, the Ministry of Transportation has issued a regulation that acknowledges the status of this motorbike taxi as a social transport. So which means that the function of this motorbike taxi has been increasing. And in that sense, why it become increasing? Because right now, they're not only offering services of passenger transport, but they also offering different services like good deliveries, food deliveries, grocery shopping, and etc. And it also become an on-demand service, which can provide an door-to-door services. So it brings convenience. In that sense, it brings up more customer. Before, the one who choose object was like lower income population, but now the customer has been also include the middle and higher income population. So next, click. The question: what will happen? What is happening during the COVID-19 crisis? So in order to do that, if you go to the next slide, I try to gather online data from mostly social media like Facebook groups, and then also Twitter conversations that is discussing particularly about this online ojek or online mobility. And in order to categorize this data, I'm using a framework from Pacheco, which 5 strategy of institutional change. So I tried to categorize what kind of activities, events, or movement that is going on during this COVID-19, if we talk about the motorbike taxi. So for example, in terms of framing, I found that during the COVID-19 crisis, these ojek riders are framed as vulnerable or high risk and vulnerable groups. And also in terms of theorization, in terms of how do they provide a model or innovations, I found that in the Twitter, there is a initiative or bottom-up initiative by the hashtag of Butuh Driver in order to give an alternative for this rider to get additional customer, because in the platform they have reduced the number of orders during the COVID-19 crisis. And also in terms of stimulating collaborations, I found this platform company also create collaborations with local pharmacy and local doctor in order to provide an online medical checkup for the customers. And then the other one is lobbying. There is a one moment in, I think between March or April, where the government planned to forbid this all passenger transport, but then if they create a movement of criticism to the government to not doing that regulation. And then the last one, negotiation. It is just one interesting finding I found is like how these object riders or people who are concerned with these object riders are trying to negotiate what does it mean by physical distancing and also health. So the negotiation is between health, safety, and also between their economic or income for the object riders. So next slide. As one of the example here, you can see in the pictures on the top right, I'm sorry, on the top left, there is a picture where actually a local shop, a local restaurant are opening themselves to give a free meals to these object riders, because that's the way they framed before that object riders are becoming a vulnerable group. And then on the others, on the top right, yeah, on the top right, we can see this is part of the result of the negotiation on trying to negotiate the meaning of distancing, because originally it was impossible to keep 1.5 meters distance if you are in a motorbike together. But the way they try to negotiate is by using this plastic shield on the back of the riders. And the other one is on the theorizations. So how they riders are trying to, how to say, like giving a concept to people that when you stay at home or when you work at home, you're trying to deliver your needs. So this is several example on the field how the social practice changing and also influence the informal mobility in Indonesia. And then we go next. So I answer my questions before. How does this COVID-19 shaping the social practices of informal mobility in Indonesia? So what I found so far, I mean, I need also your insight and comments about it. What I found so far is that how this informal mobility or in a sense, in particular, the online has performed to become a public infrastructure to the people who are working at home and also staying at home. But quite interestingly, the way they have been regulated or operationalized are actually privately regulated. So what does it mean? If we go into the next slide, I conduct several phone call interviews with some of the object riders organizations, and I found that this particular question, how should we see the livelihood of these object riders? Are they a hero in the sense that they are the one who are on the streets delivering our needs while we could stay at home? But then on the other hand, they're also struggling for their daily life. So there's still some data I found in terms of income, for example. Many of the riders acknowledge that there has been dramatic change in their daily income. In average, usually before the crisis, they have 25, on average, 25 US dollar per day for 11 hours of working. And now there's only dollars a day. And then in terms of government policy, the Indonesian government has indeed some social support for people who are impacted by the COVID crisis. But the problem is mostly this support or subsidy goes into a formal workers because the data was much more available rather than the informal workers. So in that sense, many of these object riders did not have any support from the government because it is also difficult to organize the data and also the support to these object riders. And the other interesting fact is like, well, as how the crisis being giving an economic downturn to the country, it's also many companies did layoff to their informal workers. That means those former workers who are becoming object riders for a job because they want to have additional income, at the moment during the crisis, they switch to become a full-time riders. So then it increasing the supply, but then at the same time, the demand of the customer are the same or even has been reduced dramatically. And the last one, no, there is also a platform subsidy. Well, actually the platform company has provided some subsidy to guarantee 5 US dollar a day as the income. And the rest of the income, the riders will try to rely on the customer tips or sometimes also from the social initiative like the local restaurants. And then in the other hand, if we look from the informal institutions, I also found that there is a tendency from this platform company to focus much more on their digital business rather than their human or people partners. For example, the platform company will focus more on developing the digital wallet or in the digital contents, or even to try to have an experimentation with the driverless transport. And then at the same time, I can also found that from these riders, they notice the situation and they're trying to organize to change their informal status right now into become a formal transport because they argue having a formal status will giving more protections to their job. So this is my progress of finding progress so far. And what I want to discuss further slide is a much more general discussions to all of us, not only into the mobility. So if we go to the next slide, yeah. Here I would like to raise 2 points of discussions for all of us. The first one is in understanding this landscape or the COVID-19 crisis. Well, if I try to bring up again to the case of mobility, it does bring dramatic change of mobility. And then the question is, does it also give any windows of opportunity? And at the moment, I think there are several windows of opportunity of mobility that might happen or that is happening. The first one is toward a more sustainable option of mobility. I would like to thank Wisdom Kanda and Paula Kipima for sending their paper on sustainable options during COVID-19 crisis in Finland and Sweden experience. So that might also happen in other countries. But what I also found, if we look at from the global south context, is the transition of this informal mobility. How do we make sense of this COVID-19 crisis if we look at the informal mobility? Much more characterize the global south perspective, especially here in the Southeast Asia region. Well, in the Indonesian case, I can find so far is how the COVID-19 crisis bring the opportunity for this informal mobility to be much more formal, maybe not fully formal, but like semi-formal status so far. And then there is a to become formal. And the last one is the rise of digital platform-based services, which I think not only happen in mobility sector, but also happen in public higher education sectors and other sectors as well. So the next, or the second point that I want to discuss in particular about this platform regulation is in terms of a governance of transition. How do we put or how do we position this platform regulations about the governance of transition? Well, my thoughts so far is, of course, we must take into account this platform-based regulations, and maybe the discussion that we can have is to what extent this kind of platform can privately regulated and what kind of aspect that should be publicly regulated. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to have more insightful discussions and comments and feedback from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Iana. That was also a fantastic, really, really good presentation, and it was really on an interesting topic and on a different system. So now we can also talk about sustainable mobility and different types of mobility, formal, informal. So you did bring out a lot of very important issues, especially the issue on platform economy, which is really a hot topic at the moment. We also had the IST keynote on this particular topic. So it's a really, really important topic, and I look forward to more discussion on that. Is there any question, Rafael? Or
we still have no questions here in the Q&A box. Also, okay. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can place your questions on the YouTube chat. We have several people watching us on YouTube. Maybe I would like to know if Johanna has any example of platform-based regulations in this sense, as something like some ways that public authority is trying to regain its authority over the platforms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Rafael. I think I forgot to mention on the digitalization that how we have to acknowledge the hierarchical nature between this platform and the users. So in this mobility sense is the platform company and the riders. So one of the regulations that are still hierarchical in the mechanism, for example, is in the determining the price, that they use this surge pricing mechanism that is only can be determined by the platform. The other regulations that are also criticized by many of the riders is in terms of, so for example, the platform is the only one who can suspend or delete the account of the riders without any further clarifications from the riders. But now they try to have more kind of negotiations toward that, but at the moment it's still asymmetrical with the platform and the users. So, sorry, one more. And Indonesia, for example, the government has also begun to facilitate this platform regulation. They already start by negotiating the price, so the government are intervene in terms of pricing mechanism. But at the moment, they don't have any intervention yet with the partnership agreement.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we should, in the interest of time, we should move on to the third and our final presenter, Dr. Annabel Marin.